report from the Children's Society suggesting that our children are more materialistic and it's making them miserable. John Simcox on this email says, listening to the lady from the Advertising Council, my son, who's 2, watches 5 Life, which horrifies me with the sheer quantity of toy advertising. In my day, this level of advertising only happened at Christmas and was a nightmare for my parents. Personally, I would rather see the commercial children's programming reduce and collapse back to public-funded programming. You don't need 24/7 children's programs. In summary, as a business, you only buy advertising to sell product, not to be altruistic. And I wonder, Baroness Buscombe, whether there's an essential truth in what John is talking about on that email, and that is because there is more commercial television, because there are satellite channels, there is therefore more advertising. It is just the way TV has gone, that's the way our viewing has gone.
Well, it depends what people want. I mean, I think most people, if you ask them, do they want more choice in terms of what their children can watch, the types of programming? And we're not, as I said earlier, just talking about children's programming. We're talking about hugely important, I think, in terms of what my children watch, channels like Discovery and so on. This has to be funded. If we're not going to have the taxpayer paying for all our media, and we want a democratic society where we have plurality of media, choice of media, we have to pay for it, and advertising is a route to that. But also, let me say that this is targeting to children is really restricted according to our advertising regulations.
Why not follow the Swedish example, Baroness Buscombe, and ban advertising to the under-12s?
Well, it's funny you should say that. I was just about to say, of course, advertising to under-12s was banned in Sweden in about 1991. But even the government's recent report called Foresight, which really looked into this issue in great depth, has said that bans in Sweden have not shown in any way that this is an efficient approach, that it works, that, kids are perhaps just as unhappy or whatever. Can I just make a point, though? I think we have to, when you actually start looking at some of the questions that were asked in this research that Children's Society are making a lot of publicity out of at the moment, and that's, it's good to look into all this. But, 90% of children or parents feel that children put huge pressure on them at Christmas to spend more than they can really afford. Wasn't it always the case? And also, this is the same charity that a few months ago seemed so surprised when research showed that something like 47% of teenagers feel that their parents don't understand them. Find me a teenager that feels that their parents understand them. I really think we have to keep this in context.
Tim Linehan at the Children's Society.
Well, let's go back and look at advertising, because I think, this idea that we're living in a world of ethical advertising where it's simply, companies offering greater choice. Let me read a quote. Advertising at its best is making people feel that without their product, you're a loser. Kids are very sensitive to that. You open up emotional vulnerabilities, and it's easy to do that with kids because they're the most emotionally vulnerable. That's not a charity quote. That's Nancy Shellick, president of the Shellick Agency. And I think a lot of parents who hear that quote will recognise something in that, in the way that children are marketed to. And our report today isn't simply about advertising. We all know that out there is a market. It's a very competitive market where people are spending billions of pounds. For those billions of pounds, people want a return. And in the nature of those things, it's inevitable that there's going to be a hard sell. Now, what we're saying is that the best environment to bring up our children? And that's the point behind this inquiry. What sort of childhood do we want? And it's interesting thinking about Sweden, because one of the issues around Sweden was the fact that a lot of the advertising was coming from external broadcasting. Certainly Sweden has a much better record in terms of developing a childhood as evaluated by UNICEF than we have in the UK. So perhaps there are some lessons to learn there.
Yes, I'm particularly intrigued by the amount of advertising. My kids watch satellite channels, and in primary school they see so many ads for mortgages and personal loans. I get told the kind of things that offers.
That's because advertising of so many foods and toys and so on has been so restricted that children are now on a diet, as you say, insurance and ambulance chasers and so on. So is that the solution?
Martin in Ashford on this says, I blame 40 years of liberalism, this silly idea of putting children first all the time. Children should be seen and not heard. The continual whining I hear from parents with kids just annoys me. Brilliant. When I was a kid, I got up in the morning, washed, got dressed for school, went to school, came home, played for a bit, had tea, did homework, watched a bit of television, went to bed. Weekends, I did hobbies. The fault is with liberals who are trying to turn children into adults. As for advertising, when I was a kid, I remember endless TV adverts for Airfix, Lego and so on. Nothing has changed.
Milky Bar Kid.
Mark Fawcett, what do you make of that?
I think that the email in there covers a range of issues. I wouldn't necessarily agree with all of them within there. I wouldn't blame 40 years of liberalism. We do have a far more developed market. I think one of the biggest challenges actually to parents, and I have 3 children from 9 down to 2 right now, is that we all grew up in an era with no modern media communications. There really was only the television and the radio.
We had magazines, we had radio.
Whereas now children's access to the internet, mobile phones, makes it very different for parents right now. But again, I couldn't put the blame of this upon advertising. Advertising is much more a reflection of society than a creator of society, and we as parents can control a lot, especially in the early years, of what our children have access to in terms of advertising sources. And most media now picks up on advertisers that they do think are crossing the line. So there are a lot of good controls in place at the moment. I wouldn't support any form of banning of advertising, and I think the way that as a society we're debating this now is important. It helps us decide what is right and wrong about what our children see, and that then moves forward the way that advertisers, companies and public bodies communicate with parents and children.
You wouldn't support a ban because
I don't think that a ban on all advertising at younger people or all marketing at young people is a solution, because within marketing to younger people you have marketing programs that encourage them to buy lots of toys at Christmas. You also have marketing programs that successfully encourage children to read more books, to eat more 5 a day, and to divide a line at which you say this is an appropriate advertisement and this isn't, would require an almost endless judgment to be made over every form of advertising on every form of channel.
Paul in Cardiff says, this isn't a new problem. We had this pressure 20 years ago when I was in school, having to wear the right clothes label and so on. Julia in Cheltenham, my son is 9. The pressure from his peers to have the latest computer game is immense. It costs him all his birthday and Christmas money. Chris in Farnham, advertising to children is a disgrace. They do not have the maturity or experience to make decisions or understanding of money. My 3-year-old daughter is already reacting to adverts. It's a simple question with one answer, Chris says. Your children, Zara, 1, 2 and 4, then, that's their ages, not their names, obviously. Are they responding to adverts? Can you see that?
Absolutely. Even my 2-year-old, everything has to be princess and ballerina, Angelina Ballerina. She sees it in magazines. She just talks about it. It's as much a concept as anything, and her little world is filled with it. And
is that a bad thing?
Well,
is that any worse than don't forget the fruit gums, Mum?
Yeah, I think it's encouraging them to talk about it in a healthy way and not getting obsessed by it, and not getting disappointed if they don't get the latest toy, and actually teaching them the value of things, that maybe they have to work towards getting something that they really want.
Tim Lynn, Children's Society, just briefly, if you wouldn't mind, when do we get your conclusions? You said this is a part of a broader inquiry. How long do we wait?
It's February 2009 when we finally report, and I think, I'd like to echo some of the points that Mark made, that, we know there's information that's important to share. We understand that. We know that it's important to look at, what products are available to children. I think the question is, have we reached a point where the level of advertising is so great that it's having a detrimental impact? And really, that's what today is about. And it's not simply about advertising. It's really about the sense of commercialisation.
Okay.
And in fact, one of your listeners said, well, what about the old childhood? Now, we're not saying everything in the past was good, but there is a sense of freedom of childhood that has been lost, and that's what we really want to discover. How do we help some of those things return and protect children the way they need to be
Tim
protected?
Linehan, thanks very much indeed from the Children's Society, Baroness Buskin from the Advertising Association, Mark Fawcett from the National Schools Partnership, and Zara Hobley on behalf of her kids and on behalf of herself. Thank you. It's 5 Live, 1:45. The latest